you all hear me by this all right? I'm between you and the doors, and I'm aware of that. So I'm going to talk fast, and I'm not going to take the whole half an hour. I just want to send this off, and I'm always excited at this invitation and to come, not just because I've been so impressed and proud of really the choices Kathleen has made in her life for the work she chose to do out of the 1,000 opportunities in front of her. I feel that way in a room like this about everyone. And I feel like some of what I'm about to say is sort of like preaching to a choir, but like my grandfather used to say, even the choir needs to hear the sermon now and again. And what Kathleen said is right. One of the challenges we face, and when I say we, I mean a room full of people who are right. And I know you all feel that way. There are different ways to live, there are different values. You can turn on any cable news network and you form strong opinions and you're like, gosh, those knuckleheads. You probably use different words than that. And you get together with your friends, and in your case, an entire state for the most part, and you feel like we've got this figured out. We got a lot of challenges, we can certainly do better, but we're on the right path. We've got the right values. We've got, which is human nature. You don't think to yourself on a Friday night, you know what I want to do? I want to go find a group of knuckleheads who don't think people like me should even be in the country and have dinner with them. But I want to suggest this. One of the biggest challenges we face for the future of progress in this whole nation is that all of you are stuck here in this one damn state, in an echo chamber that the rest of the country can't afford to be without you. You just heard demographically, thoughtfully understated as an objective demographer should speak. This is the linchpin of the next 50 years of politics in the country. 62% of the country is still white. Over 70% of voting age Americans are still white. Inevitably, that's changing. You all patently have dealt with that demographically far before the vast majority of the rest of the country. And it scares the shit out of a lot of Americans. It feels like doomsday. And it's fed by a narrative of tighter and tighter, meaner and meaner sound bites delivered to people on cable news and increasingly on their cell phones, whose very algorithms sort and select the things they're going to hear based on their preconceived ideas and their prejudices and what they want to hear to begin with. Literally the reverse of what it means to be a thoughtful citizenry dealing with increasingly complicated issues in an interconnected global economy that's dangerous and complicated and messy and nuanced and requires a lot more of us to be a lot more thoughtful about what to do moving forward. And as a nation, we're getting worse at what it means to be good citizens, of what goes into it. And for a room like this, this ends up being the challenge. Because there's one thing I know about you all without knowing much about you. There's some things I know just because you're human beings. We get things wrong. Part of human psychology, we start telling ourselves narratives about the world we're walking through that benefit ourselves. In other words, the majority of us think we're above average drivers. Some of you may be honest enough to stand up and be like, no, I suck it. But most of you think you're better than more Americans at driving. That factually can't be true. You all can't be above average drivers. Professors are the worst. You know 90% of university professors think they're above average teachers. And I'm one of those. But who the hell knows if that's true? The majority of Americans think they're considerably above average in sense of humor. Well, that can't be true. The fact is, in terms of sense of humor, in terms of driving skills, most of you are 4s and 5s. I think I'm above average in terms of my sense of humor, but that's because I'm purposely remembering the times I make people laugh, and I'm not remembering the times where I tried to say something funny and no one laughed. We walk through lives that way. It's the same way we do physiologically. If the air gets too hot, your body reacts to that and you start sweating to cool yourself down. Psychologically, emotionally, the chemistry in your brain, your body wants to keep you happy and satisfied and calm, and part of that ends up being sometimes you lie to yourself a little bit. Now, if it's the truth that some of us are walking through life thinking we're funnier than we really are, I don't really think that makes that much difference. In fact, I don't want you to tell me if you don't think. Let me live the lie. Well, why does it hurt any of you all? But are there some categories in which we may lie to ourselves or not be completely honest that do matter? And I think the answer to that is yes. And one in particular I have in mind is, if you think about rating yourself compared to other Americans, compared to other people, how about the category, what you could think of as an ability, of open-mindedness. How would I rate myself in open-mindedness compared to the other 330 million people in these borders? I know statistically that the vast majority of you think you're extraordinarily open-minded. That you think that's one of those categories, I may not be a great driver, but I know I'm open-minded. Statistically speaking, that can't be true, but I'm more personally invested in your specific answer. I want to tell you this, and you can't take this as an insult because I don't know you. None of you are even close to as open-minded as you think. The reason I know that is also because you're human beings. Part of growing into an adult, by the very nature of your DNA, is to become more and more convinced that you're right on more and more things you've experienced. We are all prejudiced in its literal sense, meaning we prejudge. That's what it means. If you turn a corner in a building you've never been in and you see this thing, you don't jump over here thinking it's a bomb or it's going to hurt you, or you call ahead and be like, I need some protection. You're like, it's a table. I know what to do. I can't eat it. It's going to hurt if I run through it. I'll walk around it. Like, you've prejudged it. I've never seen it before, but I have a pretty good idea. I suppose it could be made of clay. I suppose it could be made of chocolate, but that's a form of prejudging. That's what we do all day, every day. In terms of determining a threat, in terms of determining someone who's like us enough to engage with us in something we care to talk about. Part of what it means to be a functioning human is to prejudge. Is to form stronger and stronger opinions and let them be reinforced over and over as you move through life. That affects all of us. That's not just some deep red state in the South. That affects all of us. And part of what makes it harder to be more open-minded is the very fact that we all think we're great at it already. How can you get better at something if you think you're incredible at it? Now, I say that to say, I'm about to give you a couple examples, and you may already be on the open-minded side of this. But in terms of America, I don't think there's any possible way to overstate the impact of race on the next 50 years of the country. W.E.B. Du Bois said 100 years ago that he believed that would define the 20th century. I think he was right, but I don't think it even comes close to how important that will be to define this American century. And it becomes increasingly hard because even though we have technology that connects us in terms of technological ability, the vast majority of Americans are less connected to anyone unlike themselves than they have been in 50 years. We're increasingly putting ourselves in homogenized communities with like-minded people, spending less time interacting in social or civic organizations or activities that benefit people beyond our own immediate needs or the thing we're getting paid for, which at a physiological level makes it harder for Americans to have empathy, meaning to physically respond to the suffering of someone else's child. Fortunately for us all, I will argue to you that that's in our DNA. We're physically made to care about suffering, but it doesn't happen automatically. It has to be triggered. And the primary way it's triggered is eye contact and personal, experiential, conversational proximity to another human being. I'll take you all the way back. I was writing about this last week. I'm taking this year to write. I'm in a reflecting moment, trying to figure out what I want to do for the second half of my life. Definitely is. If you all agree with me, I like being places where I can convince people of things. I remember the year that Katrina came through New Orleans. I was already teaching in Alabama, but the president, who was very kind to me, agreed to let me, and actually paid for it, to let me take courses on Wednesday nights. I took 2 courses at the Candler School of Theology at Emory. I had no interest in the ministry. I literally swear, even when I'm not swearing, there's another voice in my head swearing. Like I have no interest in going. I'm fascinated with the intersection of faith and public policy, with the role that faith has in a country that's as diverse as ours, where still 8 out of 10 of us claim a belief in a higher power that requires obligations from each of us to other human beings. That's a powerful mode to start a conversation about values. It's messy, but it's an important part of what it means to be in our country still. So I'm over there taking classes. Fascinating classes. There's one class of PhD students who knew a lot more liturgically, a lot more about the Bible than I did. There's a sociology religion course. The professor comes in with an interesting poll. It was a poll, a nationwide poll, a couple weeks after the water receded. So after the nation went through this brutal aerial film of death that swamped that city. And we're going through the poll. There's African-American PhD students sitting across from me. And she saw it first. And she turned her paper over and she flipped it down. We're just sitting, it's a seminar, we're just sitting around a long table. And he noticed that and he stopped what he was saying. And he said, Sarah, what did you notice? And she pulled it back up and she just read it out. The images you saw, and it explained the images from the helicopters. Do you remember those outside of the Superdome? Day after day, before any water was even dropped. Walmart got there quicker than the federal government. Hundreds of people dead. 120,000 people displaced, stuck there. Those images, it described those. Did these images sadden you? And then you could see in the chart of the answers broken down by race was one of the breakdowns. And she read it out. African Americans, 98+%. I assume the other percent just didn't hear the question properly. 98% plus, that's what it said, I remember exactly. Next question, did those images anger you? African American answer, same thing, 98+. On both, the white answer. One was 62, for angered and saddened was like 67. And she quickly does the math and she flips it down. Said more than 30% of the white people in this country weren't even saddened by the image of thousands of people suffering that way. And she crossed her arms and she said, this is a racist fucking country. And there was silence, as you can imagine. And I thought about that. I mean, I literally thought about it for hours and then days. And I didn't say anything that day. The professors didn't say anything. I mean, we sort of, people kind of nodded and we talked a little bit about other things people had seen. And we all went home. And the seminar was back again the next Wednesday. And I think he was similarly struggling with that conclusion, the professor. And he did more research. And I did research that week. And it turns out there are, in fact, a good number of brutally racist people among us. But percentage-wise, it's pretty low. And as Dr. King says, I think presciently than any other comment, it often becomes a mistake to think about dealing with the issue of race based on what you're hearing from 300 angry idiots protesting and marching in Charlottesville. They're scary, and I'm glad the Southern Poverty Law Center keeps track of those knuckleheads all over the country. But percentage-wise, it's negligible. Like Dr. King, I'm much more concerned with the apathy of people who honestly believe they're good. That wasn't a 30% hateful bigotry number. The professor did research and he found, one of them was on NBC National News, he found focus group data, including polling, and it turns out, you can probably still pull up the footage. Huge numbers of Americans, this was their response. If you followed up to that one question and ask them why, what do you mean, what do you make of this? This is the response you heard back from millions of Americans, the majority of whom were white. I mean, don't get me wrong. I feel bad for all those people. I mean, I don't wish them ill will. I wish people didn't lose their lives. But over 100,000 of them just stayed. I have cousins in New Orleans. They saw that storm coming a week earlier. They drove to my nephew's house in Birmingham. I've got friends that left New Orleans and they drove to Houston. I don't wish those people ill will. But let's be clear. I mean, how lazy or incapacitated you have to be not to get into your damn car and leave the thing, leave the city. What was the answer to that question? Do you all know? Millions of Americans working every hour they can find, the vast majority of them don't have cars. Multiply that by 4 and you'll get the number of Americans with a car but not enough money to fill the gas up twice in between pay periods. if you think of it thoughtfully, for the Americans that the story resonated with, this served as a wake-up call for a lot of Americans to acknowledge that a large percentage of Americans are barely getting by. In fact, it's almost a majority. The majority of children growing up in the last 20 years in America have spent at least 1 year in a house that receives food stamps. 40% of jobs in America pay less than $35,000 a year. That's almost to the food stamp level. 45% of Americans through their adult life have found themselves at least 1 year below the federal poverty line. This is almost a majority experience in America, and it has been completely racialized and vilified to load onto the backs of black people that equates as if poverty is synonymous with blackness. Literally, someone who becomes president looks into the camera and is like, black people, vote for me. What do you have to lose? Your schools suck, your neighborhoods are a wreck, your city. Thinking in his mind honestly, I'm being honest with him. It's all poor, it's all, what's the black percentage? It's higher than the white percentage. It's been higher since they were enslaved. It's at 20%, 20.5 right now. Meaning 80% of African Americans are not in poverty. We literally have someone who wins an election for the highest office in the land, in the most powerful position in the world, who fundamentally doesn't even know the basic demographics of the nation. And it's not just him. You move to a poll in 1994, as we were about to reform welfare from AFDC to TANF, which is a block grant formation that has decimated the entire thing. That has barely registered in the minds of the vast majority of white Americans. They have no idea anything has changed. What they do know is there's still something called welfare, and in their minds they think it's paying black people to sit at home and not to do shit. Right now, this year, there are 1.1 million households in the nation on welfare right now. In the nation. A third of them are African American. That's 2% of black people in the country. 2% of black people in the country right now are on welfare, receiving checks that are much smaller than most Americans think. The average is $400, and that's skewed by high states like yours. In my state, it's $175 a month for a family of 3. You know how many families in Alabama are receiving welfare right now? I ask this in professional audiences, bar meetings, lawyers. It starts out silent because people don't want to seem like they're being insensitive, but if I drag out the silence, they'll start raising their hands and giving me a damn answer. What percentage? You're not offending anyone, I just am curious to know. How many people do you think in Alabama are on welfare? It's one of the poorest states in the country. There are 4.9 million people in the state. More than half of the children, about 56%, are on free or reduced lunch. How many Alabamians right now are on welfare? Hands go up. Civically, a junior league president, who's also a lawyer, raises her hand. 250,000? Another hand goes. It's like they're bidding up on the Price is Right. No. Civic leadership. All of them have degrees beyond college in the largest, most advanced city in the state. You're all not even close. There's 7,800 families in the entire state. That's not even the end zone where our team plays football. This includes Democrats. You know the majority of African Americans in the country think they make up the majority of poverty? That's how insidious it is. And this is where it touches rooms like this. Austin. Austin's a blue dot like you all. People in Austin pride themselves on being this progressive. It is a great place. Great music, a lot of technology. Kind of like if you all turn Texan. There's a study done. Got a bunch of progressive, thoughtful, professional white parents with children between the ages of 3 and 5 to participate in the study. Any of you have 3 to 5-year-olds, or you have in the past? You're like, she's a great kid. I'm happy to have you ask any questions. You start asking questions. Questions quickly turn to this. Do your parents, in relation to black people, do your parents A, like them, B, don't like them, or C, you don't know? A majority say don't like them. Picture if this was your kid, you're like, I mean, I'm not talking about Steve King's district in Iowa. I'm talking about progressive parents in Austin who literally just fall over in their chairs. Do your parents think that most white people are good, bad, or you don't know? Almost all of them. Most are good. Ask the same thing about black people. The majority of those 3 to 5-year-olds in Austin say, my parents think the majority, they don't know the word majority, most of black people are bad. You follow up with questions, and all the parents, you know what the parents said, they're like, this, I don't know what to tell you, this can't be. We have a colorblind household. I've never said anything negative about black people. And I take them at their word. They haven't. That's not enough. You don't have to be racist to grow up to raise a child who literally by age 5 will have prejudicial views toward other races that they can barely even verbalize, but they damn sure feel it. The best analogy to me, Beverly Tatum put it this way, it's smog. We live in a country that is enmeshed in the smog of prejudice. It doesn't matter how good a thoughtful a parent you are, you can't deny it. I would never talk about black people. I don't see color. What are you talking about? You don't see color. You need to see it because your kids are seeing it everywhere else. The only place they're not seeing it, if they're not seeing it, is at your damn table. That's a nationwide phenomenon. Education, no different. The next step forward in the same conversation. All the states that still haven't expanded Medicaid, what do you think the reason they haven't expanded Medicaid? The vast majority of white people in America who are against expanding Medicaid think it's more federal money to black people who don't deserve it. You know the majority of Medicaid recipients in this country in every state in the nation are white? Most white people don't know that. Do you know the expansion dollars is a higher income bracket, which is even more disproportionately white? Most Americans don't know that. Just this insidious battle of silent prejudice where the majority of people who have a diverse sensibility and a thoughtful interest in other people's children like those in this room are increasingly segmented off in communities and states with less and less contact with anyone else. You all are thinking, well, what's the positive of this? This is the most miserable topic. I'll tell you this in my remaining 3 minutes. The best precedent we have for wholesale nationwide transformation in culture, which is important to keep in mind, culture, as impenetrable as it seems to people. If you see someone interviewed in some rural community, you're like, oh my gosh, those damn people are never going to change. That's not true. Culture, it turns out, is completely malleable. If the right story is told, if the right leaders stand up, if the right narrative is in place, arguably the fastest wholesale transformation of public opinion in this country across demographics, including white evangelicals in the South, is a 10-year period of time when asking the question about the appropriateness to have legally sanctioned marriage between gay people. Arguably the fastest change that anyone can document in the history of the nation that we've been documenting, which is a little bit more dramatic than it sounds because that's only about 60 years. But in that period of time, the majority of evangelicals are for gay marriage. You think to yourself, well, what? Was it David Boies? Was it the legal brief? Did Americans read that brief to the Supreme Court and they were convinced? Did a bunch of those Fox News people turn to MSNBC and they were convinced by her argument? Was it a New York Times editorial? You think to yourself, why is it? Why was there a dramatic change in the minds of millions of Americans across all demographics and regions in a short period of time? What would your guess be? Or if someone were to ask you that, what would you answer them? Yeah. In a very short period of time, millions of Americans who are working and living and interacting with families and friends and on sports teams and clubs and organizations decided to share with their families and friends that they in fact were gay. Why is Newt Gingrich in support of gay marriage? Because his daughter is gay. Why is Dick Cheney? Because his daughter is gay. Ends up making a pretty big difference across the ideological spectrum. I think Newt Gingrich is a rotten apple. If you Google Newt Gingrich and school lunch, you'll want to throw up. Mean-spirited, hateful. Even if you attribute goodwill to someone who I believe doesn't deserve it, you would come up with this. The reason he can be this way on this and not this way on this. I doubt Newt Gingrich has any personal relationship with any family whose child is on subsidized lunch, which is a huge and growing problem. So the last question I have for you to close this out is, so how do we recreate that? What does that mean? If you're proud of your nation for moving that dramatically on an issue like that, realizing that it had to do with it being personal. It's not just the father of a daughter. There are congregations in Alabama whose choir director and the organ player stood up and said, "We're gay." And they've known them for 30 years, and they're like, "Ooh. Well, I know you. You're a good man. And we love you. And we want you here." You know, like, it doesn't have to be blood, but it's hard to have it not happen if it's not personal. My thought is, as college is increasingly the dividing line between two completely different versions of life in this country, as you all know as well as I do, the possibility, the realistic possibility of a child reaching their God-given potential, growing up in a community where they're in the bottom 25% of income earners in this country. You know what percentage of people growing up in the bottom quarter? That's not the poverty line, the bottom quarter. What percentage of young people in America right now are receiving a 4-year college degree within 6 years? 8%. If you happen to be growing up in a neighborhood that's in the top 25% of income earners, that's not the super rich. I'm not talking about the 1%ers. I'm not talking about the 38 hedge fund managers last year, each of whom made over $800 million. I'm talking about the top quarter. What percentage of their children are moving through 4 years of college within 6 years? 87%. That's not a division of talent. That's not a division of God-given ability. That's the lottery of whose neighborhood you're born into. College should be a lot more about connecting college students to families and communities unlike themselves. What it should mean to receive a 4-year college degree should mean that you've embedded yourself. And if you don't want to do it, you can't come to this college. You don't deserve the prestige and the honor of receiving a 4-year degree if you haven't taken seriously the relational side of living in a diverse, big nation like this. At a fundamental level, the next thing I think everyone here should be listening for from these candidates, this is not just some add-on sweet thing. We should have national service. At least a year. I think it should be 2 years. Not everyone should work with kids, because they'll screw it up if they don't want to be there. This can be outside work. There's a fundamental deterioration of the way most Americans define what it means to be an obligated human being to the rest of the nation. That's getting worse and not better. And it's not too much to say that this state in particular, and all of us who care about other people's children, should not feel as though large steps forward, culturally defining what it means to grow up in this country, can't be dramatically changed. Everyone in college should be doing at least 10 hours of service a week. That's how we started the Vision Care initiative that Kathleen brought here. That shouldn't be an add-on for the social work students. Every student, including the finance students at Wharton at the University of Pennsylvania, and especially those damn kids. And before anyone goes to law school or business school or medical school, everyone who applies as a senior from a 4-year school, unless you get a need waiver because you put yourself through school and your family's waiting on you to help them with income, which is not the majority of college students. Everyone else should receive back a polite email from any prestigious institution for graduate studies anywhere in the country that says, "Thank you so much, your record is impressive, but you may have misunderstood. We won't consider you until you go do something else for some damn people for a year. We'll be here next year." That's not beyond the pale. That's not beyond what this country can do. Thank you all for having me, and keep up the great work. I'm honored to be here.